And David Cameron, I'm assuming, will be presenting the report.
Moderator, good morning. Oh, you can do better than that. Good morning. Well done, thank you. Moderator, may I begin by saying thank you. Thank you to all our commissioners here at the General Assembly and online. Thank you to all ministers, deacons, ministry development staff workers, and our staff across the church. Thank you. Thank you for working relentlessly for the good of the church and your communities with patience, perseverance, and endurance, for honouring your calling to care for the souls of your congregations and parishes. Thank you to elders and members for supporting your ministers and kirk sessions through unions, dissolutions, and all the work you do diligently for God's kingdom as the landscape of our church in Scotland changes locally and regionally. Thank you to our many committees for sterling and increasingly innovative work, for finding different ways of releasing funds to support the core work of the church and helping create a vision of the future for our kirk that we can all aspire to. You all know how the day-to-day work of the church extends far beyond Sunday worship. It takes a variety of forms: pastoral care, supporting the sick and the bereaved, raising money for worthwhile charitable causes, providing fellowship for the lonely and the vulnerable, running youth groups and lunch clubs, recovery cafes, food banks, maintaining links with Christians in other countries, and social care through Crossreach. Incredible work done quietly and often unnoticed. Above all, bringing people to faith in Jesus Christ, the core functions of ministry and mission. This is who we are. The Church of Scotland demonstrates a wonderful example of caring for people. Often that has been and is with limited resources. A challenge we face is an ageing and diminishing membership. This intensifies the burden of those who serve and results in decreasing income streams to support our church's endeavours and the sense of crisis that confronts us today. Our report makes sombre, yet I hope uplifting reading. As a church, we are making progress. The majority of the action plans from the 2019 Special Commission and Radical Action Plan have been delivered. New presbyteries are in place. Congregations are coming together and finding new life beyond the tensions and demands. Initial saving targets have been met in and through the National Office. Work continues to make better use of the church's assets. We have a way to go, because the hard truth is, limited resources are becoming ever scarcer. Many congregations long to have younger people among their number. Many long to have more people among their number. With the responsibility we have been given as Assembly Trustees, we are working hard to see our finances improved. They are a challenge. So what are we doing about all of this? What is our role in building together? Growth of the church is at the core of our plans. We seek to do all we can to create the conditions for renewal of the church. We sincerely believe that what successive General Assemblies have said is right. The Church of Scotland needs to decentralise. The needs, demands, issues and solutions are best known to those who are experiencing them on the ground. Now is the time to action this further. We need to move on it, releasing resources and responsibility to presbyteries. Alongside this, and relevant to it, is the Priorities Project at the National Office, reviewing what is done and why, and making decisions accordingly. You will have seen in our report the latest information about who pays for parish ministry. As commissioners, you all know that congregations pay into the centre through Giving to Grow, so that the cost of ministries across the church are met. You may have been surprised at the figures. 71% of the charges in the Church of Scotland do not contribute enough to the centre to cover what their ministry costs actually are. As we put it in our report, only 29% of charges currently meet the full cost of ministry they receive. This is a key illustration of the challenge we face as a church. Costs outstrip income, even on something as important to the Church of Scotland as parish ministers. Looking at this another way, 89% of congregational contributions to Giving to Grow are allocated to parish ministries, reflecting the importance of parish ministry in church and community life. This means that very little remains for other areas of expenditure. Congregational contributions on the income side and ministry costs on the expenditure side represent the largest portions of the national church's budget that we oversee. Because costs continue to outstrip income, readily accessible reserves are dwindling. As your charity trustees, the Assembly trustees cannot allow the reserves to run out. You know this with your own local charity trustee responsibilities. It is one of the reasons why we are looking at so many aspects of the current operating model of the church that need review and likely reform. The General Assembly has given the Assembly trustees a solemn and unenviable task. We are committed and working towards bringing the church's forward budgets back into balance. At the same time, we seek to prioritise investing in mission and evangelism with a vision for revitalised existing congregations and forming new worshipping communities. Society is always changing. As a church, we must adapt to meet people where they are now, experiment with doing things differently. We must all be congregations who are eager to bring the gospel to young and old alike in our communities. Our Reformed heritage gives us the freedom to change how we organise ourselves within our Presbyterian polity in pursuit of Christ's mission through his church. What is difficult, and yet what we need to do, is discern the direction of travel while holding close the 5 marks of mission and look out for unexpected consequences. Earlier I said I hoped our report, while sombre, also makes uplifting reading. Are we starting to see the potential for a different, hope-filled future for the Church of Scotland? Seeds for Growth has started well, providing financial support to those who are embarking on new church plants, experimental new communities of faith, and new models of ministry formation. Encouragement is required to both new initiatives and innovation within our traditional models, promoting good examples of life, creativity, and adaptation. These are emerging across the church. Other encouragement comes. The trustees and the general trustees now working closely together with shared goals. The general trustees are increasing flexibility in use of the Consolidated Fabric Fund. The Housing and Loan Fund is releasing surplus funds for which we are grateful. In encouragement of us all in local congregations, the stewardship team remind us living generously is at the heart of our faith. God's generosity towards us gives rise to thankfulness, which is expressed through our generosity towards others. These are signs of encouragement. There is more to do. The trustees' priorities affirmed by the General Assembly in 2023 remain central as we emphasise the need for growth, leadership development at all levels of the church, and governance modernisation. The path ahead demands accelerated action streamlining our central organisation and empowering local leadership by decentralising decision-making wherever possible. Capacity, capability, responsibility and accountability are key themes. What this will look like will be determined through every level working together and collaborating to find appropriate solutions. The heart of this church beats within our congregations as they, you, we, carry the mantle of mission, forging a path forward in unity and purpose, building together. Our collective mission and proclamation are the responsibility of all believers in every place and at every level. In setting out our report, what do we ask of you here and online as commissioners to the General Assembly? We ask that you hear the seriousness of the church's financial position. We ask that you respond to the call to live generously. We ask that you respect our earnest desire to do what the church has asked of us, responsibility for the development of vision, strategy and overarching policy as guided by the General Assembly decisions. We ask that you recognise our understanding that at the heart of the matter is about seeing the good news of Jesus Christ shared and changing lives and communities for the better. We ask that you play a part in collaborative working that is needed. The solutions to the challenges that we face in the church today lie primarily where you all worship and serve. As we navigate a fundamental shift in the church's place in society, may we heed the disruptive Spirit of God working in unity on a shared journey among the people of our parishes. The book of Acts describes this as an exciting and dynamic process of experimentation, discernment, and discovery. We must return to the simple call of living out the gospel, presenting a different perspective to the world through enthusiastic worshipping, witnessing, nurturing, and serving communities, acknowledging the blessings God has given, responding by using these gifts and resources to live out the good news of Jesus Christ and bring glory to God. Moderator, I lay the annual report and accounts on the table and present the report of the Assembly Trustees and move the deliverance.
Thank you. Is the report seconded? Seconded. Thank you. Any questions of the convener? I've got notice of two. Firstly, Jennifer Adams, that will be followed by Ben Thorpe. Jennifer, where?
Mm. 349, Jenny Adams. I note that in section 21 of their report, the Assembly Trustees promised to bring further information back to General Assembly 2025 regarding developments around net zero. I also note that section 5 of the Faith Action Programme Leadership Team report makes clear the lack of progress there has been in implementing the net zero strategy agreed by this General Assembly, despite the best efforts of some. Given the urgency of the climate crisis, please can you tell this General Assembly how the net zero strategy will be implemented in the coming months? And I declare an interest on two grounds. Firstly, I was a member of the Net Zero Strategy Group until it was recently disbanded. Secondly, I am a resident of planet Earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, for the question. I much appreciate being given notice of it. Work has been ongoing over the last year and since the launch of the Net Zero strategy. That strategy has placed duties in all parts of the church to consider the responsibility, including our congregations, presbyteries and the national administration. Several presbyteries have responded by organising conferences to consider net zero and climate justice with input from Christian Aid and Eco Congregation Scotland, as well as the GTs and Faith Action staff. The net zero pathway referred to in the General Trustees and FAPOP report went live in the autumn and is on the website under Resources Achieving Net Zero. The trustees are grateful indeed to the work of Justin Taylor and the Net Zero Group for the work undertaken. We confirm the spiritual, ethical, missional and statutory obligations relating to carbon emissions reduction have been and will continue to be part of the AT agenda. We advise that the details of precisely how net zero will be managed, overseen and accountability have still to be worked out, but that it is intended that this will be put in place soon and will be done in relation to the recommendations of the Priorities Project. Can I just also reaffirm that the 2023 Net Zero Strategy outline requires action and attention from every part of the Church, and if it is not familiar to people, then information and resources are available on the Church of Scotland website under the Net Zero pathway. So we are taking it seriously. It's difficult to navigate. We all know that. You all know that too, but we all have an obligation to see it through. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. And Ben Thorpe.
Thank you, Moderator. Ben Thorpe, 181. Much of the report that we've heard and read underlines the need for sustainability within the Church. And actually, even in one section, there's a mention of non-viable congregations. It would appear that this is primarily linked to financial concerns. And certainly, finance is a valid concern within the Church, but these questions need to be weighed against our priority for the poor, our Presbyterian ideals, and our desire to plant new worshipping communities that will take time to develop robust financial structures. However, as we found during mission planning, and as highlighted in some of the congregational statistics in the report, our metrics of measurement are minimal and inconsistently interpreted. Do the trustees have any plans to broaden their metrics for measurement of sustainability beyond financial concerns so as to be able to have a more accurate picture and to enable presbyteries to make more informed decisions?
Thank you, Ben, for your question, and indeed for giving me notice of that question too. It was very helpful to be able to format our response. The Church always has a priority to the poor. When Dave Kendall became Chief Officer, it was one of the key things he established was the Research and Analysis Unit, which was created just after the 2019 Special Commission recommendations. The types of information that the question refers to, including changes in congregational numbers, professions of faith, young people in our congregations. I'm sorry, I'm reading someone else's writing here, if you bear with me. These are examined and modelled through each congregation. A number of presbyteries use this information to inform their decision-making as it presents a picture of the health of the congregations in their local area. Presbyteries are welcome to the model, and you can contact the Analysis and Research Unit through the Office of the Assembly Trustees. So, in full answer to the question, all this information is now available to us in a way that it once wasn't, and we're able to make very good use of it at a local, regional and national level. Thanks again for the question.
Right. I'm now going to move to the section 1, receive the report, and then I have got some comments on my screen of people wishing to make comments. So first of all, does the Assembly receive the report? And online? Thank you. Now, the notice of comments on section 1. I'm going to hear from Christopher Rowe and then Marjorie McLean.
Moderator, thank you. Christopher Rowe, 176. If I may make a comment and have a question at the end, is that in order?
Yep.
On Saturday, like many of you, I was here at the Assembly Hall. It was that beautiful sunny afternoon. The rest of Edinburgh felt a bit like Italy, with cafes and people out on the streets in the sunshine. I got the train back through to Glasgow, where I live and minister. The train pulled into Queen Street, and it was a sea of white and green celebrating Celtic fans. I was quite relieved that I might have been mistaken for a priest and had a few hello fathers. And then I cycled home from the city centre north into Milton, where I live and minister. The sun was shining, the roads were quite empty. And then as I approached Postle Park on Saracen Street, it was obvious there was something going on. There were flashing blue lights, there were police cars and vans cordoned off the road. And I had to take a route out. And as I passed, I asked one of the young policemen standing at the cordon, "What's happened?" And he says, "I can't really tell you. Someone's been stabbed and he's been worked on and it's not looking good." And by the time I got home, I was just reeling from this contrast of two different worlds. This world here of our deliberations with all of the pomp and the ceremony, a beautiful sunny day, and then arriving to find out, and later a 27-year-old man had been stabbed to death in broad daylight about half an hour before I was planning to cycle through. And so it led two thoughts in my mind. One, a big thank you to the police, who hold together these disintegrating pieces of lots of our broken society. And then something about the nature of ministry in the priority area where I work. About 3 years ago, my children would have been playing a few hundred meters from where a man was shot dead in broad daylight in Milton. They've had to walk past going to primary school, cordoned off bus shelters as specialist contractors clear blood off pavements. We sit in the manse and we listen to police sirens going past. We go, "Oh, there's a car, that's two police cars, oh, there's two police vans, oh, there's the riot van." Something is happening and it's not good. Knowing that something bad is happening has an impact on everybody, but particularly on children. And sadly, while violence is present in all of our communities, it's concentrated in our poorest. And that accumulation of what have been called adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, has a long-term negative impact. And children are not immune to that. We, as a family, try to put in protective layers. Thanks to the church, we have a big enough house to live in. We've got more than enough money to meet our needs. We have choices in life. But much of that isn't true for many of the people to whom I minister and among whom I live. The church is one of those protective layers, a humanizing factor. And yet male life expectancy in Milton is 64.5, 10 years below the Scottish average, 20 below some communities just a few miles walk away. And it's not just the poor who suffer by that, all suffer. Ubuntu is not just a nice concept, it's a reality. And could it be any other? We who are made in God's image, in a Trinitarian image of relationship at its heart. And in unequal societies, all suffer, from the most affluent to the least. We had a visit last year from a lovely Presbyterian minister from New Zealand, John O'Ryan, and his family. They'd come from Dunedin. They were researching and looking at the way the Church of Scotland did its work amongst the poorest. They'd come from Dunedin, where in the south of the city, the more deprived part, over the years the churches had withdrawn, they'd left. They weren't able to sustain a ministry any longer, they'd closed. And so the churches in the north of the city, after a period of time, said, we need to do something about this. We can't have a city where half of the city is filled with churches, the other half has none. So he was commissioned to go and seed a new church. And listening to his story, it was fantastic. It was exciting. It was the kind of seeds of growth stuff that gets people's pulse rating, missional activity. And yet it struck me that it's very much harder to start something again than it is to keep something going. And in Glasgow, we've had that issue where trying to reseed churches into priority areas has not been an easy task. And so, as well as thanking the police, I want to thank the Kirk. I want to thank you for that priority to the poorest that feels as though it is part of our denominational DNA. I want to thank that 29% of congregations who support the 71%, because I want you to remember that that includes the bottom 5%. Without your support, my family and I would struggle to remain and minister in Milton in your name. And presbytery planning has been brutal. And Milton and Postle Park are to link and later to unite. But without that foot on the ground, it's hard to see how the Kirk can continue. And so a question, if I may, when I read that the priority areas were to be reviewed in section 15.7 of the Assembly Trustees report, I fear that review is a euphemism for cut. And so I just want to ask if the convener can reassure me that that's not the case, and that any review will be about strengthening what is working already and working according to those long-established principles of the priority areas, that those experiencing and living in poverty, they are the experts and need to be at the root of any consultations taking place. Thank you.
Christopher, thank you for your comments, your impassioned comments, and indeed for your question. Priority areas has been a much valued resource in the church with a lot of investment over many, many years. People who have heard me in meetings talk about priority areas will have heard me say it's learning that we need to share throughout the church. We have had a new appointment of a head of the priority areas. They've reached a natural milestone with that new head taking up post. There's an opportunity to assess the key focus of this review. This offers a key opportunity to review how it aligns into the new structure of supporting the local, what should happen at national and presbytery and local level. This is what the review is about. Priority Areas has not undertaken this review in many years and has seen changes in budget allocation and resources over a number of years, and it's now time to ensure the current arrangement is most effective for this valued piece of work. We recognise the value, but we will, along with other departments and other areas in the church, continue with a review process. That is what you have asked us to do as a General Assembly.
Thank you. Dr McLean.
365, Marjorie McLean, speaking as a parish minister, not as legal questions convener. Throughout the church out there, we are, many of us, going through a great deal of pain in the changes we're having to undergo, and many of them are not enjoyable. It seems to me there is a group of people who probably lose sleep on more nights than any of us do, and that is the members and staff of the Assembly Trustees, because the detail of this is in front of them all the time. So I have a challenge to ministers, interim moderators, members of presbytery planning committees. When you are in meetings, in kirk sessions or congregations, and people do any of three things, the first thing is to talk about Edinburgh as if it is a cesspit of iniquity. Now, you may have opinions about the city, but ecclesiastically it's not. When they use, this is the one that really gets up my nose, when they use the phrase the Church of Scotland to mean something other than them, some monster in the distance, presbytery or 121, and in this era of pronouns, when they talk about them, when they really ought to be talking about us, then in the spirit of the moderator's communion sermon about naming things correctly even when that is difficult, my challenge would be gently pause the conversation. Suspend the meeting if you need to. Give them this Assembly Trustees report. Make sure they have read it. And then name that the people who are behind that report are us, are as dedicated as us, and are there to serve us, and that we are grateful for that, and that we will always name that. Thank you.
And now Tim Norwood, one of our ecumenical delegates.
Tim Norwood, 484. Moderator and Assembly, on behalf of most of the ecumenical guests, we really want to send our love and concern to you at this time. I was particularly moved last night at the launch of the new supplement as we came to the final song, as we sang a blessing on all those who were gathered. a real sense that we as those who were singing, we who were there, wanted to bless you as a church, acknowledging that you're going through some challenging times, but we are with you, and we send our love and our support and our care. I think I'm particularly conscious of the challenges that you're going through in restructuring, given some of my own experiences as a minister responsible for an area, a number of churches. And I think I said before in this assembly that when I became responsible for those 30-plus churches, one of the things I realized straight away is that we were raising 42% of our ministry costs, and therefore had to go through a period of change and rethinking. And we went through some really difficult and challenging years. Nothing to the scale that you're going through, but it was a time of change for us. And one of the things that I learned through that time of change was that those parishes who actually worked these issues through on the ground and worked through the problems and came to solutions were the ones who saw the benefits first. That actually working, you've actually got to face it. You've got to go through it. You can't hold it back. And facing the challenges brings blessings. But the other flip side of that equation is that those places who looked outwards in mission and care and concern, particularly for the most vulnerable, also saw God's blessings. And I reinforce everything that's been said about priority parishes and the needs of the world. It has been a joy over this past year to work with Church of Scotland colleagues in my current job as we've looked to serving the UK nation and looking to things that we can do together. It is in looking outwards that, again, we find God at work. And I want to quote, as I think I have done before, the book of Haggai, which is one of my favourite books, and I keep coming back to it. And it's very much in line with your theme, moderator, about building back. When the prophet says the glory of the future house will be greater than that was there before. And as your guests today, I'm sure I speak on behalf of many of my colleagues, we look to the future of the Church of Scotland with hope and with joy and with prayers and with every blessing that we can give you at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Move to section 2. Is that agreed? Oh. Right. Apologies, 2 people have just come onto the hub, which went there a moment or 2 ago. So we have comments. First of all, I'm going to ask for William Wilson, and then followed by David Ferguson, and then Douglas Gay. So William Wilson, first of all.
William Wilson, 183. Moderator, General Assembly. I'm the Minister of Burnside Blair Beth Church, and it's in that capacity I speak as one of the 29% that has been spoken about already by the convener and also by others. I also heard Dr. McLean's comments there about us, and we are the church. I note in section 2, the church's financial situation demands urgent attention, and I would heartily endorse that. But I would want to say that whenever we see the church here, what I'm really thinking of is Burnside Blair Beth. And what you're thinking of is your parish, where you are. And what you're thinking of is the people who give the money, not primarily so that the General Assembly can decide how it's spent, but for local mission. And so I want the Assembly to know how dispiriting it is for the congregation, where we pay our way and more, and they will have less than 1 minister from the presbytery plan. General Assembly, I was thinking about Saturday, and the one decision that we made, or the one deliverance that had bite, as it were, that came, that was brought by Dr. Hamilton, which was a financial deliverance. And over the weekend, a kind of mantra has come into my head that our experience is, it feels like you provide, somewhere else a committee will decide. Because on Saturday, Dr. Hamilton tried to bring a motion with teeth. And I suspect he's is a minister in one of the 29% too, and was told, let the committee get on with their work. Moderator, the message that has gone out from this General Assembly is, you take the cuts on the ground, but we're not changing the traditions and the way that we do things. I go back just a wee bit more dispirited, having heard that message on Saturday. I fully support the Assembly trustees in taking stock financially, but they have to allow congregations which are thriving to thrive. The emphasis has been in the local. Can we see it in action as well as words, please? Thank you.
Thank you. David Ferguson, please.
David Ferguson, number 4. Moderator, I wish to thank the convener and trustees for their work and for the report that they've presented to us this year. Since its inception 5 years ago, the trustees have faced a formidable series of challenges compounded by the pandemic in relation to money, membership and structural reform. They're to be commended for their honesty in confronting us with the stark figures and also for their resolve to tackle with determination an unsustainable deficit. I particularly welcome the convener's determination to move the church to a modus operandi in which greater power and resource will be devolved to regional and local levels. This was the intended trajectory of the 2019 Commission. Nevertheless, in reading across the many reports to this General Assembly, I'm struck by how much of our work continues to be subject to executive decisions taken at the centre. The cap on ministry numbers, approval of presbytery mission plans, the disbursement of the 25 million Seeds for Growth initiative offer a few examples. Some of these mechanisms may be necessary, yet one wonders whether initiatives are being unintentionally discouraged, even thwarted by our modus operandi. We know from research that growth and church plants are best achieved by local and personal initiatives. The most deeply troubling statistic is the one to which we have already alluded, 2971. The Special Commission in 2019 affirmed that support for the poorest and most remote congregations was both necessary and desirable, yet it was never envisaged that this number would constitute 71% of our charges. And what I find missing in this report, and here I echo the remarks of the previous speaker, is in section 115 on the ways of reducing the deficit. There is, I think, little recognition that the 29% are crucial to our future and thus in need of protection for their contribution to the whole church. Every process of reform and renewal requires an element of conservation, and conservation is also one of the providential works of God. We have sustainable churches which cover the full cost of their buildings and ministry, yet we know that too many of them are being imperiled as they're caught up in presbytery planning processes, sometimes resulting in prolonged vacancies with uncertainty around buildings and ministerial provision. The predictable result is that they are losing members and money. My own congregation here in Edinburgh finds itself in this position. Though generating income for around 3 ministries, it is prevented from calling a minister of its own at this present time. Why are we doing this? It looks like an act of institutional self-harm. It's counterproductive for the 29%, as well as for the common good of the church in every location, for we cannot continue to fund the poorest and most remote areas, of which Mr. Rowe has spoken most eloquently, if we do not protect the more sustainable elements of the church. So my plea to the trustees is to give closer attention to this problem in the year ahead. if only to identify a set of temporary measures that can be used to protect those healthiest parts of the church for the sake of the whole. But again, I thank the trustees for their honesty, their determination, and their hard work, and I welcome their willingness to be bold in facing these acute difficulties. And like Marjorie McLean, I urge the General Assembly to assist them and to support them in all their endeavours. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you. And Dougie.
Moderator Doug GA2024. I want to welcome the challenge which is contained in the report of the Assembly Trustees, and to my comment is in favour of the call for continuing radical action in deliverance number 2. I also want to welcome the emphasis on decentralisation and very much to support what David Ferguson has just said. There is a deep concern, clearly in the report, around issues of sustainability. And I think this figure of 2971 is one that we need to reflect on very carefully. We have been through unsettling periods of reform and restructuring. In the past, I've described our form of Presbyterianism as a high solidarity, high control form. And I'm convinced we need to reflect on and move away from the highly centralised processes of rationing both ministries and buildings which we have been implementing. And if we don't do this, I think we're in danger of simply repeating the current process again within 3 to 5 years, and it will be even more painful. I'm convinced that we need to transition into a new era of local sustainability and local empowerment. And that will also, absolutely, Chris, mean new approaches to solidarity and sharing, which continue to keep our covenant with the poorest congregations in Scotland. But we need to move to a situation where decisions about local ministries and local buildings are taken by local congregations who have greater rights and greater responsibilities. And if we empower local congregations, I think we will be surprised by the way in which new flows of resource will appear in response to local vision and local need. I very much welcome the moderator's theme of building, but I am convinced that decentralisation is crucial to the work of rebuilding mission and witness in local communities. We will not rebuild and regrow the church through a system of top-down centralised rationing. We need to set the church free at a local level to rebuild and to regrow.
Okay, my screen is now blank, so just put section 2 to the General Assembly. Okay, move to section 3. And online, section 3. Section 4. Section 5. Right, we have 2 comments on section 5. Firstly, I'm going to hear from Andrew Moore and then Grant Barclay.
Thank you, Moderator. Andrew Moore, Parish Minister, number 231. More than a few years ago, while a BB boy, I remember roaming some hillside with some friends on a Duke of Edinburgh expedition. You learn very quickly when setting out on journeys, it is crucial to double-check your bearings. My grateful thanks to the Assembly Trustees for this report and their tireless service of the Church. As we note the ongoing work in relation to reviewing the suitability of current tenure arrangements, given tenure's historic theological significance,
it would be worthwhile considering if a course correction would make the review more helpful. The 2021 Faith Nurture Forum Report section on reviewable charges reminds us that there is no retrospective legislation in the Church of Scotland. Appendix 7 of this year's report of the Faith Action Programme leadership team says of the 526 ministers in a parish, only 46 are inducted to a reviewable charge. So we must continue to trust our many ministers who, in the words of the 2013 Special Commission interim report, agree to readjustment when there is no compulsion on them to do so. The Special Commission on Ministerial Tenure and the Leadership of the Local Church, in their interim report of 2013, asserted that, and I quote, tenure, the holding of office of minister in such a local church, must be a dynamic concept. They also say, to some extent, this conclusion has moved us on from the remit given to us to develop forms of ministerial tenure. The arid and isolated discussion of bases of tenure should, we believe, be replaced with a new sense of what it means to be called to leadership within the Christian family. This is as much about a change in culture, they continue, as it is about mechanical process. It will be the work of many years and many people. The Special Commission regarded new developments such as local church reviews and ministerial development reviews as instrumental in changing our understanding of tenure to one that is dynamic and alive, necessarily growing and adapting in time and space. They would point us away from isolated discussion of basis of tenure. They are saying it is the wrong path, and we should listen to those who've walked this way for years. This is to say nothing of, for example, the impact on stability of congregational life or the impact of multi-way union votes on a minister who, unlike myself, is in a reviewable charge, after which if one vote goes the wrong way, a young man's family may have 6 months to uproot their entire life. Now, of course, people move homes. They usually have some say in the matter. The call of God by a congregation to a charge is a solemn commitment shared by all the church, including her courts. It is the greatest privilege to be made a minister of the gospel, to preach the unsearchable riches of Christ. And so these matters ought to be weighed with the greatest care. So as we set out on this review, let's check our bearings, make any course correction required, guided by those footsteps of those who have walked this way before. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you. And then Grant Barclay.
Grant Barclay, 163. Moderator, as all the speakers before, I want to thank the work of the Assembly Trustees. This is deeply complicated and challenging material, and it does require close attention to detail. And so, as the Clerk of Glasgow, I simply wanted to draw some attention to section 10 in the report, and particularly to the table on page 13, which was, in my electronic copy, really quite small and difficult to read. And I think that one of its issues is that it confuses costs to the church and benefits to ministers. I recognise and support the need to review stipends and simply encourage the trustees in this work to name things as they are, as my colleague Marjorie McLean mentioned earlier, and to be clear what we are talking about. I no longer live in a manse. I did so for 25 years. I don't get a stipend, so it might be easier for me to speak about these things because I have less of an interest, but here are some of the issues which I have discerned in the table. The notional cost of the manse is shown as nearly £13,000. The table calls this a congregational cost, but I know of virtually no congregation which is actually paying that cost. If you read the even smaller print, you'll see that's based on the City Let's average rental price. That notional cost is actually, I think, a benefit inherited from previous generous giving to the church, and so congregations aren't paying a monthly rental for the manse. Congregations do benefit from the increased value as house prices generally rise. Ministers living in a manse generally do not, unless they make alternative arrangements. The additional cost to a manse family of heating a manse isn't included in the table, and this might be a significant omission when ministers have no control over the size or condition of the manse, or when, as we now know, between half and 2/3 of manses are in the poorer energy performance bands D and above. And at the very bottom of the table, I do think I have some issues with some of the figures there. There is no ongoing contribution to the defined benefit pension, and I'm unclear what the £7,000 figure mentioned there refers to. The state pension is not a church provision, but is, as its name suggests, provided by the government, and it wasn't fully paid for by employer NI contributions. All ministers are paying national insurance towards their own state pensions too, and suggesting that pension income may be augmented through locum work is not possible or desirable for everyone, and in any event, it's not confined to ministers. And where a locum serves in a vacancy, the cost to the church is a deal lower than when a minister is inducted to that charge. And so, to show locum payment as an additional cost without recognising that other costs are thereby avoided, well, it seems to me that doesn't quite tell the whole story. And the last comment I'd like to make, particularly given Marjorie's earlier comments about how we refer to things, is referring to the first line of the table. I don't think it's entirely accurate to say that stipend is a national church cost. The scheme is certainly administered centrally, that's wise, but the vast proportion of stipend costs are still met overall by local congregations. So I raise all of these issues not to challenge the work, in fact, to support the work, but to indicate that it is indeed complicated, and as it's developed, I'm simply asking that clarity of thought and expression be brought to all of this, and particularly to the quite separate areas of cost of ministry on one hand and financial package offered to ministers on the other, for I think that that clarity is likely to help everyone.
Thank you. I've notice of another comment, and Christine Murdoch.
Christine Murdoch, 148. Moderator, I'd like to speak to section 5. I too would like to thank the trustees for all the work that they have done. I was inducted to my previous charge in 2006 on a reviewable tenure. And those that can do the maths will realise that the 2020 vision was accepted by the General Assembly. I knew that my time in that charge would be short-lived. I have always believed in the call of God to our congregations. I'm also now learning that God calls us, or I have learned, that God also calls us away from congregations. Can I say that that was an unsettling time in our family? Of course it was. It was extremely unsettling. Yet now, in the charge that I am, would I be there had I not been called away from my previous charge? I do not know. So I now see the hand of God at work in the last 14 years of my life. And I can assure you that God's call remains in our lives. And I also want to thank those that affirmed my call when I was, quotes, between parishes. It was an unsettling time, but God's hand is there. Please, in the spirit, in this season of Pentecost, let us trust God's call in our lives.
I have no notices to speak, so I'll put section 5 to the General Assembly. Section 6. Section 7. Now we've got an amendment to Section 8.
Sorry, getting the right glasses on.
You want these ones?
I'll try them as well. Sorry, moderator. We have an amendment to Section 8 of the report to the deliverance in the name of Scott Rennie. And for the assistance of the Assembly, I will read out the amendment because we deal with the amendment first. For those of us who were at the training on Friday night, we remember? Yep. So this follows on from the end of the Section 8, and it will go semicolon. Nevertheless, urge the Assembly Trustees to bring proposals to the General Assembly of 2025, which will deliver the Church of Scotland unincorporated entities, SCO 11353, a balanced budget position by the 31st of December 2027 at the latest. So we're dealing this amendment first in the name of Scott Rennie.
Thank you. So I'll ask if Scott wishes to speak and then propose his amendment. So you are hiding from me over there.
Yeah, that's all right. Thank you, Moderator. Scott Rennie, 462. Moderator, I want to thank the convener for his speech and the Assembly Trustees for their full and informative report about the resource challenges facing the Church, all of us at this time. It's most starkly set out in Section 8.1.7, where they tell us of this year's eye-watering deficit of £8.1 million, and further, based on their revised assumptions, that the General Fund will be depleted entirely by 2032. As Vice Chair of the General Trustees, I sit with the Assembly Trustees in an ex officio basis, and I want to commend them and their extensive work to find cost efficiencies across the work of the National Church and savings. And they have made remarkable progress in doing so over the last number of years since their inception, and they deserve our thanks. I have no concerns about their ability to meet the challenges ahead. My concern is rather with all of us and the Church at large. I worry that despite years of pointing out the parlous situation of our finances, the penny has not yet dropped. That we as a General Assembly and the Church at large does not truly understand what might be required of us in the few years ahead. That we have to reach a balanced budget position. In fact, I'm not at all sure that people in the pew in my own congregation understand the size of the deficit and what that deficit means for the future payment of stipends and salaries across the Church. We need to go back to our congregations and parishes and let them know the reality of the financial challenge we are all going to have to meet in the near term, and encourage them to live generously so that the work, whether it's in London or in Glasgow, in Edinburgh, in priority areas, wherever it is, it needs to happen. And I propose my amendment not as any criticism of the report, quite the opposite. I offer it as a means for this General Assembly to take up its responsibility and encourage the Assembly Trustees in their stewardship and in the task they have of finding different operating models and new ways of financing the Church. This Assembly is the highest court of the Church. It's our responsibility to set the direction and to give the encouragement the Assembly Trustees need. And whatever savings are made across the Church, by far and away the largest line on the budget is the cost and benefit of parish ministry. The current financial position of 29% of congregations supporting 71 is simply not sustainable, I believe. And if we don't resolve it, it will lead us to insolvency, and all the good work that goes in the poorest areas will be at risk. This amendment allows us as an Assembly to affirm the Trustees in bringing us firm proposals next year, which the Assembly will be able to debate and decide and choose from, so that we can urgently arrive at a balanced budget. Whatever responsibility the Trustees have placed on them throughout the year, This General Assembly is the church, and this General Assembly is the body with ultimate authority and responsibility. And given the grave financial situation we find ourselves, it is this body that should be decisive in urging the trustees to get a hold of our finances and bring proposals which will deliver us a balanced budget as soon as is reasonably possible, ideally by the end of 2027. I've deliberately used the word urge in the motion and not instruct, because I trust the trustees to do their work. And if it also leaves them a little bit wriggle room in that if, having urged them, they found they needed an extra year, you know, we'll survive that. But I just want this Assembly to make explicit what is implicit in the report. I want us to give explicitly the challenge, but also the affirmation to the trustees to bring us into a balanced budget. And I encourage you to support the amendment, which will give the trustees the support they need in the work they have to do in the coming year. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you. Is the amendment seconded? Thank you. I have got notice of a comment from Michael Goss.
Thank you, Moderator. Goss number 312. I'm not speaking either in favour or against of the motion. I've got a lot of sympathy with what Mr. Rennie is saying. I think a lot of it makes a great deal of sense, that we need to face the challenge of the financial situation that we're in, and we need to do that with some urgency. I wanted to pick up on what has been reflected several times in this Assembly, the figure of 21% supporting 79%. That's a historic number. 2971. Thank you for correcting me on that one. But it is a historic figure. Why is it historic? Because it's based on numbers that have already changed, given unions that have taken place since the numbers were first established. Unions that have taken place within the last 6 months, even. One of them being a congregation that I'm part of, no longer Barry with Carnoustie. I'm now part of Carnoustie Trinity. The numbers will be different. We were already a sustaining charge. We're now part of a bigger, I think still sustaining charge, although there are complexities with the team ministry to which we belong. What I am wondering is, where were all these huge mission planning changes that we are already undergoing, where are they going to go with these numbers? They should mean that we have a more sustainable church overall, because we should be seeing weaker units becoming part of a more sustainable, larger unit. And I hope that is largely the situation. But from what we've already heard earlier today, and from other situations of which I'm aware, we will also be seeing large sustainable units being brought together and becoming less sustainable or providing less for the whole. So I'm hoping that that figure will be changing to be a more balanced figure overall, the 2971, but it may not be. And we need to face the challenges that that will bring to us as a church. But yes, by all means, let's face the realities together and take that back to our congregations and our presbyteries as we consider the future. Thank you, Moderator.
I have no notice of question or comment, and I wonder then whether the mover amendment wishes to add anything else before I ask the convener to close this part of the debate. So we're not actually dealing with, we're dealing with the amendment, not the actual substance of section 8 at the moment. Scott, where are we at again? You happy to leave it? Convener.
Thank you, Moderator. Thank you, Scott, for the amendment to the section of deliverance. I just want to reiterate something that I alluded to in my own speech. It is the duty given by the General Assembly to the Assembly trustees as charity trustees of this church to show leadership, both by making targeted budget cuts where there is an element of discretionary expenditure within our delegated powers, and by setting out to you, the General Assembly, as the highest court of the church, areas where cuts should be made in order to achieve a sustaining operating model. I don't like using the word cuts, but this is what this amendment essentially could mean, and it gives a kind of targeted date. I want to also assure the Assembly that we have been working towards this currently. It's an ongoing process, and but it's entirely up to you to accept or reject this particular amendment, but we are working towards it, and we do need to get to that balanced budget. Thank you, Moderator.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask the clerk then to read the amendment for us.
Thank you, Moderator. So we're voting on the amendment in the name of Scott Rennie. It reads as follows, adding on to section 8 in the print, semicolon, nevertheless urge the Assembly Trustees to bring proposals to the General Assembly of 2025 which will deliver the Church of Scotland unincorporated entities, SCO 11353, a balanced budget positioned by the 31st of December 2027 at the latest. Thank you, Moderator.
We're going to take this by way of an electronic vote. It also gets us into the habit of how this works. So I'll call on the Vice Convener to advise.
Moderator Kirk 532. Moderator has called for an electronic vote. On Saturday, we had what you might call our first live performance of an electronic vote, but I can appreciate that there may not have been every commissioner there on that day, so I will go through the arrangements for an electronic vote in detail as I did on Saturday. So first of all, I will address the question of people voting on the hub. Online commissioners on the hub, you will find that voting buttons, green and red, for and against, will appear on your screen on the hub on the current live debate page, not on the Zoom. And it's beside the current amendment that is under consideration. So if you're wanting to vote for the amendment, you press the button for, and if you want to vote against, you press the button against. And when you have voted, a tick will appear on the button to show that you have voted. If for any reason the buttons have not appeared, then try refreshing your page by clicking current live debate button and also checking that you are still connected. For commissioners in the hall, you will be voting using the Bluetooth handsets, and if you are voting for the amendment, you will be voting for button 1, and button 2 is against. And remember that if you are voting in the hall, you cannot vote on the hub. It's disabled on the hub. So you use your Bluetooth handset if you are in the hall. Now you can vote as many times as you wish. Only the last vote you enter will be counted. And following the vote, the figures for the hall and the hub together are calculated and announced. There will be 30 seconds in which to vote, and I will open it and I will close it. So the voting is now open. Ten seconds to go. The vote is now closed.
The amendment is 234 for, 96 against. The amendment passes. So we now take Section 8 as amended. Okay. Section and online? Online, great. And we now have a new Section 9 in the name of Grant Barclay. I would ask Dr. Barclay to speak to this. Thank you.
Grant Barclay, 163, moderator. I think I'm speaking in my capacity as the Assembly vacuum. I'm really just hoovering up an issue which was raised informally last year under the pension trustees, but quite rightly, they weren't able to deal with this, and so more formally, I am moving this motion. The intention of this proposal, moderator, is to require the Assembly trustees to keep monitoring how the defined contribution pension is doing. I think this is different from and slightly wider than an ethical oversight committee. It's about assessing the whole provision to ensure that those who rely upon the pension have the comfort of doing that it's doing what the Church intends that it will do. The other pension scheme, which we will hear about later in the Assembly, is the defined benefit scheme, but it closed at the end of 2013. I don't think it now receives any more income, and all pension contributions since then have been made to this defined contribution scheme. And so anyone ordained since 2014 has no rights in the former scheme, but only in this defined contribution scheme. And it seems to me then that it's only right that now that the scheme is about 10 years old, that we should have regular detailed examination of how it's doing. I have to say my understanding of all these things stops there. I think it's for the Assembly trustees to work all of this out, and so the motion doesn't pretend to suggest how the trustees should do this, but simply permits the Assembly trustees to work out the mechanics in the way that they may see best. And I would hope that perhaps next year or the year after, the Assembly might anticipate a first report, assuming that this proposal is acceptable to the Assembly. I think I have organised a seconder, moderator, but time will tell.
Thank you, Dr. Barclay. Is there a seconder? Thank you. Questions? I've got Alan Hamilton on screen. Thank you. See you. There you go.
44. I would very much like to support this motion. Moderator, perhaps in the hope that it's, the scope of this ongoing review will be slightly wider than Grant Barclay anticipates. We've already spoken about, or Grant has already brought before us, concerns about just whether it is accurate that certain of the benefits, supposed benefits to ministers, are quite as deep and as valuable as they are said to be in the Assembly Trustees report. I'm hugely supportive of what the Assembly Trustees are doing. I think one of the key things is that they are telling the truth as it is, unvarnished. You cannot read this report and go away thinking things will be all right on the night. However, I think with the benefits, particularly in relation to retirement, that are listed for ministers, I think perhaps they've gone slightly too far. And I say this because, and I'm picking up again on what Dr. Barclay says, the value of a manse to a minister and family, well, you could argue it's the rental value, but I think it's more the value to the church. It's an incredibly cheap and tax-efficient way to pay ministers in a way that does not attract pension contributions. Because about a fifth, quarter to a fifth of our remuneration package is not valued, does not attract pension contributions as far as I'm aware. I don't know of any other employment where that happens. It's the downside of being forced or being obliged to live in tied accommodation, which of course you lose on retirement. And I doubt that some of the employees of the church, whether at presbytery or at national level, who are paid real money for their whole salaries, whether in fact they would be comfortable with only a percentage of that attracting pension contributions. So I think part of our review should be looking at exactly what pensions are assessed upon. But I say that as what I hope is something that can be corrected or at least acknowledged. Perhaps acknowledged is the key thing in what is otherwise an excellent, far-seeing and, I would say, prophetic report. So I would support Grant Barclay.
Thank you. I have noticed that Colin Sinclair would like to speak. I also understand that the Assembly trustees are willing to accept this amendment. Colin, do you still want to speak? Okay, no problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Moderator. 68. I'm very glad that the Assembly trustees want to accept this. I just want to add two small points. The reason why I raised this last year was because I didn't want the Assembly to think that usually the encouraging report from the pension trustees reflected the actual living conditions of younger ministers who hadn't benefited from the defined benefit scheme. But there was another aspect of the old scheme which I'm scared would get lost, and that was that for many ministers, their sense of call kept them busy, active on the ground, and pensions were somehow up there, either not thought about or not understood. What was remarkably helpful under the old scheme was that if you were completely clueless, you could contact that department and they would walk you through an understanding of where you were in preparing for your pension. And it was a very supportive pastoral relationship that many of us as parish ministers really appreciated. And so my additional question to the Assembly trustees is, as well as reviewing in whatever way they do the question that Grant Barclay has raised, is just to say, are we providing the pastoral help for ministers, some of whom don't think about pensions till it's too late, or who just want a question to begin to think through planning for their future in the busyness of parish ministry. And if that would also be taken on board without words by the Assembly trustees, then I'm more than happy to leave it there. Thank you.
Just to check if you wanted to respond to that question.
Sorry, I'm going to respond to the others.
That's fine. You can do it now.
Thank you, Moderator.
Oh, hang on. Sorry, there's nothing on my screen. Did you want to speak to this, Neil?
Yes, Moderator, thank you. Can I
Sorry,
speak to
David.
it? Thank you.
Yes.
My name is Neil Glover, number 303, and I was involved in the change to the new defined contribution scheme. When that scheme was set up, it was deliberately designed so that the same level of contribution which was made into the old defined benefit scheme was made into the new defined contribution scheme. At that point, it was 16.1% of stipend, which is an unusually high figure and partly compensates for what Alan Hamilton was talking about the fact that the man's part of income doesn't attract pension. So it's simply to make the comment that the amount put in is significant. If that change had not been made approximately 10 years ago, we'd be looking at significantly larger deficits than we are today. And also just it will be slightly difficult, I mean, I'm not objecting to this deliverance, but it will be slightly difficult to do because members of the scheme have options as to which scheme they want to contribute towards. So the performance of the scheme will depend on what people have decided. But I think it was important just to make that comment. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you. I don't see anything else on the screen, so that's fine. Dr. Barclay.
Moderator, am I right in thinking, Grant Barclay, 163, that this is me speaking before the convener closes the debate, in which case I just wanted to answer Mr Glover's point that while he thinks this might be a challenging thing to do, I would simply say that the Pensions Institute recently carried out a consultation in 2022 and 2023 on this very thing, and my understanding is that they came to the view that this was indeed a reasonable action to take. And so, anticipating David Cameron, the convener's comments, I'd just like to thank him for his willingness to take this on.
Thank you, Dr. Barclay. Convener.
Thank you, Moderator. Thank you for the questions and discussions. I have to say, my dad told me to start contributing to a pension scheme in my 20s. I couldn't have cared less. I'm now at that age where I'm kind of concerned. So I declare an interest. Assistance has to come, first of all, from Legal in General. We can't advise. There is a legal line that we cannot cross, very different to the defined benefit scheme. I thank Grant for advance notice of the deliverance, which was helpful to frame a response which now follows. To expand on it a wee bit more for members around the arrangement that exists in respect of the defined contribution scheme. As Grant noted, these are the Church of Scotland pension plans which replaced the defined benefit scheme in 2014. There are two schemes, one for cross-reach staff and the other, the Church of Scotland pension plan, which covers ministers, ministry development staff and the CSE and staff employed by a number of presbyteries. The difference between a defined benefit and defined contribution scheme is that whilst the DB scheme promised a sum of money at the end of a period of time, the DC scheme is a personal pension managed through our current pension provider, the Legal in General, as I alluded to a moment ago. The work that has been requested does in fact happen on a cyclical basis with the Church's pension advisors, undertaking a funds review to ensure that the Church of Scotland pension plan and the funds available to members remain appropriate. We particularly focus on the default fund, which is, as the name suggests, the fund where members' pensions are defaulted to should they not wish to manage their own funds. 89% of the 874 members have their money held within the default fund. This review is managed through the Group Personal Pensions Group, which has been in existence since 2014 and formally meets on an annual basis. There are further meetings throughout the year with our pensions provider, Legal in General, as the need arises. In the forthcoming months, we will be arranging online information sessions for members regarding the DC plan, as we have done in the past, and I would encourage members to take that offer up. We do need to be clear, though. No employer can guarantee an appropriate retirement income, because what is appropriate, as in my idea, might differ from yours, and defined contribution schemes don't guarantee an end sum. What we would encourage people to do is to actively save more with the employer, ensuring that they have the most adequate default scheme in place. The Church has an incredibly generous pension plan with 11.5 to 14% employer contribution. Legally, the Church, under current regulations, only needs to be making a 3% contribution. So, Moderator, as the deliverance invites, we will be reporting in more detail to the General Assembly in 2025. You needed to have this information too. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Convener then is willing to accept. Is it the mind of Assembly? The Assembly accepts. All right, I'm going to ask that, sorry. And online, thank you. Principal Clark wishes to make a comment.
Thank you, Moderator. As some of you'll see, I'm back to my two sets of glasses, so I can't always see what's going on in the hall if I'm not wearing those ones. So I really just implore everybody to make sure when they're wanting to speak, they do it through the hub and do a request to speak, because otherwise, with all the screens and everything and my I can't see any of you now. I really would appreciate that. So thank you, Assembly.
Thank you. So we're now moving to section 10. I've got notice of an amendment. Sorry. Oh, section 9 as in the print. My apologies. Agreed. Section 10, I have notice of an amendment in section 10, and that's coming in the name of Neil. Tommy, where are you? Oh. Yeah. Tommy, before you speak, and while we're waiting for your red light to come on, we'll get the clerk to read your amendment.
Thank you, Moderator. This is the amendment to section 10, which is an addition to it, and it's in the name of Tommy McNeill. and it states as follows, and further amend the regulations by adding new paragraph subsection 3 in the new paragraph 3 as follows. Subsection 3, foster discipleship and revitalisation within established congregations with the aim of growing an existing congregation or developing a new worshipping community. So it is just from this section 3, all that gubbins I've just read at the beginning, isn't it? So I apologise for that, but again, the eyesight's not great. So it's foster discipleship and revitalisation within established congregations with the aim of growing an existing congregation or developing a new worshipping community.
Okay, Tommy, do you wish to speak to your amendment?
Moderator McNeill.
Oh, seconded.
Oh, seconded.
Right, well, seconded.
Thank you.
Now it's your turn this time.
Wonderful, third time lucky. Moderator McNeill 454. Like to thank the Assembly Trustees for the report. As convener of Faith Action Programme Leadership Team, I get to attend their meetings and I have nothing but admiration for them and the work that they do and the profound challenge. Oh, am I not loud enough? Oh, wow. That's the first time I've ever been told that. So as convener of Faith Action Programme Leadership Team, one of the priorities for me is to listen and to listen to the church. And one of my first duties was to attend a meeting of the Assembly Trustees last June. And when I was invited to attend that meeting, I was given the opportunity to speak. And they were encouraging that they too have a heart and a mind to listen. And as I spoke to the Assembly Trustees, I shared with them that I absolutely rejoiced in the money set aside and given to Seeds for Growth, which in the context of the profoundly challenging days that we're living in was, for me, a real step of faith and a real source of hope in terms of looking and planning towards a better future. And having commended them for this, I then shared with them a real concern I had, that Seeds for Growth was exclusively set up towards the settling of 100 new worshipping communities. For me, my concern was that this was far too ambitious, where we were going to find 100 leaders to lead these 100 new worshipping communities. And I shared with the Assembly Trustees that I was concerned that we were setting ourselves up for disappointment. And in that meeting, I said that the bigger issue for me, whilst I'm all for church planting and new forms of church, I celebrate that, but that by having exclusively towards 100 new worshipping communities and ministry to under 40s, which was the two priorities for Seeds for Growth, that by effect we had disenfranchised most of our other congregations. And for me, that was really unhelpful. So in that meeting, I made the suggestion, would it be an option to change the wording for Seeds for Growth, that we look for 50 new worshipping communities and 50 revitalized churches. And that's really the basis of my amendment, that we want to take the whole church on a journey towards a new, a brighter, and a better future. And I think that there is so much remarkable work being done by our existing congregations, but the end fruit of that may not be a new worshipping community. It may be that, but it may also just be growth within them. For me being the Minister of Mars Memorial, we have seen extensive growth in the last number of years, and I'm not sure if the growth that we've seen because of how we've set it up through the Shed project would necessarily be seen as a new worshipping community, and yet we now, through the Shed project, employ 15 members of staff. So it's just this amendment, which I understand the convener of Seeds for Growth is willing to accept, and I'm hoping that the Assembly Trustees would also be willing to accept the amendment. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you. I've got notice of two people wishing to make a comment, so we'll hear from Fiona Crawford first, and then Scott Burton.
Thank you, Moderator. Fiona Crawford, 186. I really welcome this amendment from Tommy. As an Assistant Minister, I've been working alongside congregations that have been in vacancy, sometimes quite a long vacancy, and also with congregations who are uniting and looking at a new shared future together. What my observations have been is that there is often a real desire to do different. There is a desire to be missional. but what often is lacking because they have been in vacancy for some time. There's a lack of confidence, perhaps, in how they articulate their faith, and there's also a bewilderment about how to engage well and missionally with their communities. I think that what Tommy is proposing is going to be really helpful for congregations who are really serious about wanting to revitalise and do things completely differently, potentially, but to discern that going forward, and as they do so, to be growing and building their own faith so that they are better equipped to reach out to the communities and to be missional within the areas that they know and love. So I'd really just like to commend what Tommy has proposed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now Scott Burton.
Scott Burton, number 221. Thank you, moderator. I also want to speak in favour of Tommy's motion. My congregation of Brightons has been working for some years to employ a youth worker. We are part of the 29%, and we pay double what we would be if we were just trying to cover our own local costs. But we are glad to be part of that wider church and see, and I've commended that to the congregation about the benefit of Presbyterianism. However, when our youth worker committee went to seminars on seats on the fund about seeing if we could access that fund for our youth worker, we were told no, because we weren't able to say that we were deliberately working towards shaping a new worshipping community amongst young people. And we were disappointed to hear that news, understandably. We don't want to set up a new worship community just for young people. We want to see young people come into the church family and see that church family revitalized through their life and presence amongst us. We welcome them gladly with open arms, and we are changing more than some people can cope with, but we're changing. And some people have said to me, well, just use the language, Scott. Say that you are fit within the system. I feel that that's been disingenuous. I feel there's a lack of integrity with that approach. And so I fully endorse what Tommy is doing here. I think I'm called as a minister in part to see my church remissioned, renewed. And this isn't a necessarily unhealthy church, but is a church that is struggling with mission, even though we are very healthy financially. And we have a heart to reach out to the vast numbers of young people that are on our doorstep. But we are carrying such a burden, paying for double. My congregation invests in having a pastoral assistant for me as well, so that I am not burned out in my first years of ministry. They've had that for a number of years, but they're looking to the church to say, help us reach these young people. And right now the door is shut without this. And so I'd heartily endorse it and ask the General Assembly to do so as well. Thank you, moderator.
Right. Thank you, Scott. I've got another two individuals wishing to make comment. We'll hear first of all from Sean Swindles and then Alexander Forsyth. And I've been waiting for years to say this. We'll hear from Sean Swindles, and I just assume that's a misspelling or mispronunciation of the word Shaw, because everybody calls me Sean rather than Shaw. So, Sean Swindles.
No.
There you go.
Moderator, you may call me anything.
Oh, please switch the microphones off while I respond.
Moderator, I just really want to make a comment here. I think sometimes we confuse church
plant. We've got your name, your number.
I do apologise, moderator. Number
374.
374.
I'm seeing here. Sean Swindle, 374.
Thank you, moderator. I think sometimes we confuse church planting with church revitalisation. There are a number of independent churches who do church plants on a speculative basis to see if they take root, and many of these kind of can be like seed cast on shallow soil. Here within the Church of Scotland, we are obviously all committed to the communities and parishes we serve. But I just wonder if we need to kind of try and separate the two and realise that we all need to become new churches. We all need to be renewed, revitalized, reinvigorated. The church of the past is not going to be the church of the future. So I do see there is a place for doing church plants or new worshiping communities, but I'd see that in a more limited context. The most important thing is the revitalized church as we are, but better, renewed, restored. Thank you.
Thank you. And Alexander Forsyth. There you go.
Thank you, Moderator. Sandy Forsyth, number 5. I speak in support of Tommy McNeill's amendment and also speak as the author of the report to the Assembly in 2019 called Inspiring New Worshipping Communities, which introduced that phrase into our lexicon, and also a goal of 100 new worshipping communities. At the time when that report was drafted, there was a lot of consideration from myself and others involved as to whether a number should be put on that. Because, of course, as one speaker has already mentioned, the possibility from that is that we face disappointment, and it also perhaps seems a target that's beyond our possible achievement. But it was felt at that time that it was good to set bold goals, and it was good to be ambitious, and also to emphasise the importance of the development of pioneer ministries and new worshipping communities within the lifeblood of the church. So the first comment I would make is that commissioners in the church should not feel that the setting of a number attached to that is a burden, or indeed, if that number is somehow not achieved, that is in any way a sense of failure. We're perhaps guilty in the church in many avenues of judging ourselves numerically too much. And so it's meant to be an inspiration, and I'm sure the many people who are beginning to engage and have engaged in forms of pioneering over many years are still encouraged within the church. And it's wonderful that Seeds for Growth is bringing further encouragement and resourcing to people who are thinking innovatively and creatively about what the future of the church and ministry and the gospel in our communities might be. Can I emphasize, I think that that innovation and creativity is vital looking forward to the future, not as a standalone exercise. People who are pioneering and looking to inspire and form, with God's help, new worshipping communities should not be seen as lone wolf messiahs or as people who are sitting and subcontracted in some way by the church to go and do new things in new places. They should be seen as very much part of what Rowan Williams called a mixed economy, that they're feeding into the lifeblood of all parts of the church. So I do hope in all our thinking about this, our consideration of the work of Seeds for Growth, our thinking about pioneering forms of ministry and mission and new worshipping communities, we do not see it as something that's separate or in competition, and that one should get less treatment and another should get another treatment. Perhaps the beauty and the hope and the great potential of this is that both will transfuse into the other, and there'll be a revitalization of our inherited forms of church as well as inspiring forms of the new. So I would support Tommy's motion. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm minded to take one more comment before we process to deal with this amendment. That's one of our ecumenical delegates, Andrew Norman.
Andrew Norman, 601, ecumenical delegate from the Church of England. I hadn't necessarily intended to speak into this debate, but I find it resonates with my own experience in my day job, which is in the Diocese of Leeds in the Church of England. It's a big diocese formed out of 3 slightly smaller dioceses. We have 400 parishes, and like yourselves, we have a deficit. Like most Church of England dioceses, we have a deficit. And so we have a program of engaging with our parishes across the diocese, whether they be in rural areas or urban areas or priority areas or more prosperous areas. And our program has involved looking at each parish with the support of kind of local input, if you like, to assess the strength on 2 axes, missional strength and sustainability. And out of that, we have 4 quadrants. And if you're in the kind of low missional strength and low sustainability, you know, attention is clearly needed. But alongside that, we have a sense of how strategic a particular church or congregation might be in terms of its location, which might be because it's in an area of deprivation, or might be because it's at the heart of a town, or in a particular location, or perhaps in a predominantly Muslim area, where to take away a strong Christian presence or to weaken it would be a big mistake. Our program to address this, we've called the Barnabas program, Encouraging Confidence. And that has involved coming alongside each of the congregations. And as you hear, you know, for a diocese, there's a lot of congregations, to assess what is required in terms of revitalization, hence the resonance with this amendment, within the context of a mixed ecology. And as the previous speaker just mentioned, that was, in fact, mixed economy was a phrase that Archbishop Rowan Williams came up with. And I talk about ecology because it's more of a kind of organic thing, if you like. But it might involve church planting or setting up new worshiping communities, or it might involve building confidence to be more missional within the life of the local parish, or building resilience within that parish in order to be able to be more missional, but more practical things required. So although far be it from me as an outsider to decide whether or not this, as it were, the money that you've set aside with Seeds for Growth should be apportioned in this particular way, the sense that the agenda is to encourage confidence across the existing congregations and with the innovation for new worshipping communities. That's my day job, and it's really encouraging to hear you wrestle with this, so thank you.
Thank you. Tommy, do you want to come back and add anything?
Just a brief comment, Moderator McNeil 454. We've engaged in presbytery roadshows. We visited 3 presbyteries, and we are doing this in partnership with Seeds for Growth. We're doing it deliberately. I absolutely concur with everything Sandy said. We need to celebrate and champion the birthing, the planting of new churches, new worshipping communities. But when we're out on our roadshows, what we're hearing is there's tremendous work going on, and as we listen, but we need some help. We need to be resourced in order for the work that we're doing for that to grow. So we'll have revitalised churches alongside the church plants. So the amendment that I'm proposing is coming as a direct result of us listening on the ground at these presbytery roadshows.
Right, thank you very much. Convener.
Thank you, Moderator. And we're listening too, and we're happy to accept. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Is the Assembly happy to accept the amendment? And online? And online. And then put the amended deliverance to the Assembly? And online. So the section is then approved. Moving to section 11.
Moderator?
Oh, sorry.
I'd like to make a comment on section 10. I had put it through the hub, so I hope to...
It's just come on after we've moved on. Yeah. Is it pertinent? Everything, of course, that people want to say at Assembly is pertinent.
It's pertinent to section 10.
We're getting near lunchtime as well, Neil. However, if you crave my indulgence just a little, and if it's a very brief comment, then we'll move on to section 11 thereafter.
Moderator, I just want to urge the Assembly to get applications in for Seeds for Growth, and I have a dream that in the Assembly of the future, it will be filled with people who have been part of Seeds for Growth projects, and please get your applications in to make that happen. Thank you, Moderator.
Right, moving then on to section 11. I'm not seeing any indication of people wishing to speak. Just giving it a little second. And then put section 11 to the General Assembly. And online. And online. Now, we've got quite a few amendments coming in for section 12, so good news, a few minutes early, I think we will suspend for lunch. And then come back. Now, in the few minutes, remember what I said earlier, as you're going out, make sure no one's heading somewhere on their own, please. Invite them, welcome them in, and share with one another. Now, section 12, we've got notice of an amendment, a new section in the name of Peter Johnston. Now, we're going to hear this, then we're going to pause, because there's going to be an amendment to the new section. Then we hear the amendment to a new one, then we'll debate that through and then eventually get to an amended deliverance. Okay, we have still to read.
Thank you, Moderator. Just for the Assembly's clarification, I'm just going to read out for Mr Johnston his new section 12. Because we have got some amendments coming to it, it's quite helpful for us to know where we're at. So the new section 12 in the name of Peter Johnston is invite the Assembly Trustees to bring proposals to the General Assembly of 2025 for a new standing committee of the General Assembly to have oversight of and responsibility for the Church's work in relation to external affairs, potentially including public life and social justice, ecumenical relations, international work, partnership and presence, and interfaith matters, and to liaise with the Ecumenical Relations Committee, Faith Action Programme Leadership Team, Nomination Committee, and others as deemed appropriate to prepare and implement any changes which may be required, including the drafting of a detailed remit.
Mr Johnson, do you have a seconder for this?
Yes. Thank you, Moderator. Peter Johnston, 361. Moderator, I need to declare an interest as I offer this new motion to the General Assembly. I am currently a member of the Faith Action Programme Leadership Team, FAPLT. Previous to this, I served on the Faith Impact Forum, and prior to 2020, I was a member of the Church and Society Council. Now, while some might think I have mug tattooed on my forehead or a distinct case of can I say nay-itis, this has given me, being part of that transition from the council to forum to FAPLT, some insight and a vantage point which informs this new section. Last year, the General Assembly agreed to merge the Faith Impact and Faith Nurture forums, forming the new Faith Action Programme Leadership Team with a new remit, membership, and ways of working. With admirable aspiration, the D10 group sought to change patterns of working away from silo working and encouraging new connections and opportunities with a united remit and new strategic oversight structure. And I can testify to the change of culture, practice, and process during that time. It's my understanding that much of that previous silo culture, which was evident in the days of the former four councils, is no longer evident, and that is a good thing. Furthermore, those of us that have been part of the new structure have all worked hard in this past year to understand, to develop, and to grow into this new structure. In no way is what I'm proposing meant as a criticism for the dedication in good faith of many people to try to make this work. However, after a year of operation, I do not think we have our governance structures right. As the FAPLT agenda is understandably focused on the huge challenges facing the Church at this time in relation to reform, mission, and ministry, it has meant that FAPLT's capacity to consider and scrutinize the work around public issues and public witness has been limited. We just do not have the time and capacity to do this. My view is that the FAPLT remit is simply too big for one team, albeit subdivided into program groups, to be able to manage this vitally important work effectively. What I'm proposing, which I understand comes with the agreement of the FAPLT convener, vice conveners, Assembly Trustees convener, Chief Officer and Ecumenical Relations Committee convener, gives permission for conversations and work to be done to explore whether we have got this right and whether a shift may be required. And I would fully expect and hope that the principles behind the 2019 Special Commission, the D10 report, and the Assembly Trustee priorities
that the national church serves the local church, and the simplification of governance structures would be the framework for any reconsideration. On Saturday, in our worship and our debates, we heard about the importance of sharing the good news to a world racked by violence and pain, and the growing importance of working alongside our sisters and our brothers in different Christian traditions here in Scotland and around the world. This motion is an appeal to consider how we, as the Church of Scotland, best engage with and relate to public issues and partner institutions in a coherent and strategic way, and for greater clarity of oversight from and reporting to the General Assembly as our platform for sharing our ideas out to the wider world. Now, the deliverance begins with the word invite rather than instruct deliberately, as it is offered with a spirit of sensitivity to so many who are trying their best in the time of change, but also with a desire that we together seek to be the best that we can be. And in that spirit, I seek the Assembly's approval that some time is spent to review and reflect, and if appropriate, to bring proposals to next year's Assembly. Moderator, I move the notice of motion.
Right, have you a seconder, Peter? Sorry for being out of breath. Taking those stairs 3 at a time is just... They want to do a picture with me with the choir, so my apologies for abandoning
Yes, it is seconded, yeah.
Well, is it seconded rather than you just nodding your head? Seconder somewhere, yes. Yep, thank you very much. Now, I believe we're not then going to move to discussion in a minute because we've got an amendment to the new section in the name of Brian Kerr. Right.
So I just want to alert folk what the amendment is, and as you know, amendments come first, and you'll now see why we're doing the amendment before we went into the substantive debate, because the amendment in Mr. Kerr's name is, instead of the word invite at the beginning of the new section that Peter Johnston has proposed, it be substituted with the word instruct. Thank you.
Principal Clerk, Kerr 227. I hear everything that Mr. Johnston said about time and about sensitivity, and I would echo that we need sensitivity where changes are made. We've had a huge raft of change. In 2019, there was a special commission where we merged councils into 2 forums and an instruction given to bring detailed remits back to the 2020 Assembly. Pandemic hit, don't know if you realised, and then things moved after that. And just last year, we gave detailed consideration to merge again. With that, I agree with what Mr. Johnson says. We've lost some space for that outward focus. And it's right that we're focused on who we are and what we need to do to change. But I'm old enough to remember, I know I don't look it, but I genuinely am, when we had a pretty much full-day BBC coverage of what the church had to say in terms of social issues, in terms of issues of peace and justice, in terms of where we as a church were discussing the way forward for ourselves and for others to consider. Now, yes, the world has changed, but we still have that prophetic voice. We heard earlier from Dr. Hamilton about the Assembly Trustees report being somewhat prophetic in what it does. I agree. I think we're missing some of the prophetic in other areas of how we look out. The reason I'm suggesting instruct is because I'm concerned that to invite means we've got an out. And I don't think this General Assembly can have an out when it comes to speaking about social issues, about our interfaith work, about our work overseas, about our work with other partners. I think it's a non-negotiable, built into the fabric of our denomination, the DNA of who we are. So to instruct means that we set a marker. There are some great things in the reports that you'll read later on in the week on the net zero and climate change, but yet there are no sections of deliverance. Things are kind of lost in reports through no fault of anyone's, just the sheer volume that FAPL have to deal with. By extracting this work and instructing the Assembly trustees and the others to make arrangements for that, it means that this Assembly say we need to give a high priority, not just to looking at ourselves, not just to balancing our budgets and working out ministry numbers, but in saying that we have something prophetic to say to our nation and to the world, and we stand side by side with people. I enjoy reading these reports. I appreciate the work that those who craft them put into them. I also appreciate the time, dedication and expertise of those who know far more than me about these issues and share them with the church. Instructing this change means that we'll perhaps get back on an even footing so that we can once again be the prophetic voice that this church ought to be. So, Moderator, I do move this amendment to delete the word invite and insert instruct within this section of deliverance.
Is that seconded? Okay, now I'm just conscious of the time. Peter, would you be happy or not happy with changing? So this is not closing debate or anything.
It's up to the will of the Assembly.
That is fine. So we're debating on the amendment to change, urge to instruct. Any questions or comment?
Apologies, Moderator, I'm not in the hub there yet. Ross Blackman, 220, and Convener of Ecumenical Relations Committee. I would just say in respects of the amendment there, personally I would say I'm ambivalent about whether it's invite or instruct, because I would imagine that should this go through, would be getting involved in those discussions immediately and very quickly, and we want to find some resolution quite quickly. So I'm not particularly exercised one way or the other when it comes to this particular amendment. Thank you.
Okay. Do you wish to come? Oh, sorry, Sally. Sally Foster-Fulton.
Foster-Fulton 536. I would like to speak in favour of Mr. Kerr's amendment to the amendment for the simple reason that it gives it teeth. It also gives a clear direction of travel for the Assembly trustees and for FAPOLT, and I think it's actually a very positive move. So I would speak in favour of instruct. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Tommy, are you trying to get in this?
Yeah, in the Isle of Moderator McNeil 454, we're not up to speed with this technology where I come from, so I appeal for grace. I want to speak against Brian's counter motion for one simple reason. I'm just asking for some time. When I was invited to apply for the role of convener of Faith Action Programme leadership team, I really struggled with the fact that there was so little flesh on the bones in terms of what the shape of this work and new team, because it's uncharted territory for us as a church. And for the first 6 to 8 months, it was just getting to grips with who we were and how we were going to operate. And I've got to be honest and say that that journey continues. And I've had ongoing conversations with Emma Jackson, my vice convener at Public Life and Social Justice, around this issue, similarly as I have with Alistair Cumming, my vice convener for Resource and Presence. And if we instruct, then the decision is made and we have no further say in that. And here's where the reason why I'm resisting this is that Emma's heart and the heart of Public Life and Social Justice is to be that prophetic voice and to be able to be in the public square and bring that. But her heart is also that issues of public life and social justice are a priority for every single congregation. And the best means of achieving that is through the work that we are engaging with through the Faith Action Programme leadership team as we re-engage with local congregations and encourage them and mobilise them to be that prophetic voice in their own town and island or village. So that's the reason why I would resist, and I would support Peter's motion about invite, simply to give us some time to walk this out. Thank you, Moderator.
Okay, thank you. I'm minded now to ask Peter, whose original new motion is, whether you'd like to make comment on the amendment. No, you're happy with that?
Respond to...
yeah, sorry, Brian.
Sorry, thank you, Moderator. KR 227. I hear what the convener of FAPL is saying, that if the General Assembly say instruct, the decision is made. Yes. I think quite simply it is made if that is the way the Assembly decide that we put that priority on these conversations. And that doesn't stop anyone if we go down this route of working with other agencies, working with other bodies. But I do think that yes, to instruct does mean to say that we've made a decision. And I think that in this instance and in this work is actually quite important to our church, to our congregations and to the communities that we serve. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you. And the convener?
Thank you, Moderator. Thank you for the discussion and for the new section of deliverance, which I'm very in sympathy with. However, I'm not in sympathy with the word instruct. I would echo Tommy's comments on that. The Faith Action Programme leadership team was developed to streamline the central resources for much of the church's activities. It was to improve our governance, create a single body for the programme to oversee a shift in who does what towards presbyteries and the local church, and how we speak into national issues. To make leadership explicit and a key element of the Faith Action Plan and its emphasis on inspirational leadership. The 4 programme groups would involve a relatively small group of appointed members engaged in responsive decision-making. Responsive in the sense of facilitating ready responses to a range of different situations in ever-changing contexts. This work is evolving, just as Tommy has said. In our report of last year and 2022, we talk about reviewing this programme, which we will do. That review will be worked on during 25, and I think it's 26 we report on that. So, the word instruct, based in this section of deliverance, presupposes an outcome that we're in no position at the moment to determine. So I'm mindful over the years of that they've been trying to prevent duplication of work and align the work streams as we continue to resource the key activities appropriately. That will continue. Can I also say, we've been talking about this with the Assembly Trustees, the Principal Clerk, the Faith Action Programme convener, and other interested parties, and particularly finding the place of the public life and social justice. We've been talking for about 5 or 6 months about where to find the fit. That conversation continues, and I want to assure the Assembly that we will do that and do it appropriately. So I have sympathy with the original proposed deliverance, section of deliverance, but not the word instruct. So I would ask you to reject the word instruct.
Right, thank you. Now we're going to move to a vote on this one. And just to be clear, we're voting on whether the new section will be invite or instruct at this stage. And those in favour? The advice is we're going to go electronic vote. So, sorry, Sheila, you're back on.
Kirk 532, moderator is called for an electronic vote. We are voting on the amendment proposed by Mr. Kerr to Mr. Johnson's new section. So, I won't go through everything I said earlier this morning. I hope everybody's got the hang of that. If you are voting on the hub, then the voting buttons should appear against the amendment on the current live debate page. It will be buttons for or against. A tick will appear to show that you've voted when you've used the buttons. If the buttons have not appeared, try refreshing your page by clicking the current live debate button and check that you're still connected. Commissioners in the hall are using your Bluetooth device, and you will press button 1 if you are in favour, button 2 if you are against. Again, you can vote as many times as you like, only the last vote will be counted. There will be 30 seconds for the vote. The vote is now open. Ten seconds remaining. The vote is now closed.
Voted for the amendment 98 and against 261. All right, so we now deal with the new section 12 as we had it originally. Yep, we have another possible amendment. Do you wish to pursue that?
Moderator Middleton, 461. I'm not going to pursue the amendment which would have had the effect of bringing things more quickly, and although Assembly will be deprived of a witty speech by me, I think in this occasion I'm content to withdraw my amendment.
Right, thank you very much. So we have the original motion, which was in Peter Johnston's name, and I've got here on the screen, I've got James Patron Bell, sorry, and then we'll take Ross Blackman after that.
Moderator, members of Assembly, I welcome joined up working. Sorry, my apologies. James Patron Bell, 485. I welcome this joined up working. Quite often, sitting as the ecumenical officer, I find out through the Ecumenical Relations Committee what's happening that my own church is doing in the social justice sphere ecumenically. This joined up working is positive. However, as already said, it should not be a foregone conclusion where this goes. There are several bits that, while they overlap with both World Church and with ecumenical work and social justice work, in each of these three, there is still technical spheres that are needed. The technical work carried out by the Ecumenical Relations Committee, and I should declare the interest that I am a co-opted ecumenical member of it, can deal with faith and order matters, deal with the interchange of ministry, deal with offering advice and guidance to local ecumenical partnerships, the general congregations on the ground, and to presbyteries in their support. And at the session on Saturday, the Assembly agreed for the engagement of the Ecumenical Relations Committee with presbyteries to help promote that work, more taking the work to where it's needed on the ground and not sitting at the centre. So while welcoming joined up working, I would hope that the Church would not prejudge an answer that would leave us technically bereft of the specialist spheres within these areas that we still need. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ross Blackman.
Thank you, Moderator. Ross Blackman, 220. Yes, for many of the reasons that have already been mentioned there, that really is quite helpful. I'm particularly thankful for Peter for the way that this section has been worded and articulated. I think from my own perspective and from our committee's perspective, I'm sure we would welcome a considered discussion on this. Our only concern, as was the convener's comment there as well, was that that might be in any way prejudiced. And I suppose having all those various committees mentioned in a single deliverance like this, there is almost a concern that with all those diverse kind of interests, it might feel a little bit like a mopping up exercise of all the awkward bits that we didn't put into FAPL. And that's not intended to be the case, I'm sure. And certainly we appreciate comments such as our Methodist colleagues have brought there about that public-facing opportunity that ecumenical relations to have with the continuity for other partners as well. But that having been said, whilst I have got that concern that we have a considered discussion about this, nonetheless, I'm certainly agreeable to us having that discussion. I think it would be very useful indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Not on the screen, but I see Andrew Gardner wishing to speak.
Thank you, Moderator. I speak Andrew Gardner, number 302, nomination convener. It's not that long ago.
No, on you go. Start there. Microphones come back on.
Okay, thank you. It's not that long ago the nomination committee met to help forge and fill the places of the Faith Action Programme leadership team. It wasn't an easy task, creating a committee of 40 plus people from scratch to put them on the leadership team and the 4 programme groups, trying to get the best people to do the best work for the church. I asked the Assembly and the Assembly trustees, do we need to form another standing committee in the near future? Surely we need to let the new structures bed down, do their work. And if there's a need to review, if there's a need to make changes, then we can do that in the future. But now is a bit early to ask the Assembly trustees and General Assembly to do that. A few weeks ago, I told my congregations confidently that we're reducing the number of committees and reducing their sizes. What will I say when I go back? I urge the Assembly to resist the formation of setting up another standing committee in the near future and to resist Mr. Johnson's deliverance today.
Thank you. I'm seeing Derek Browning at the microphone.
Moderator Derek Browning, number 2. Whilst I hear the previous commissioners' plea for reductions in size, I would wish that the Assembly would support what Peter Johnson is bringing forward. If we're discovering that rain is coming through the roof now, we don't wait a couple of years to see how much water has got to be lapping around our ankles before we do something about it. It seems to me to be perfectly clear that whilst we do not want a bonanza of committees being formed, this is important work that needs to be done by the church. And if some of the people who are currently involved in this are already squeaking at the pips with the amount that is being passed on to them, I think it's important for this Assembly to recognise that need, to recognise that challenge, and to affirm that the work those folks are trying very hard to do is so important to the outward-facing work and witness of our church, for which we all have a heart, that a body being suggested here, looking at the situation, then coming back, I think, to next year's Assembly or whenever, is time enough for thought and consideration to go into what it is we're asking these bodies to do. At presbytery level, we already know that with reductions taking place in the numbers of committees there, and with the changes in parishes, we're finding it more and more difficult to find people to serve. Here is another situation where we have to face up to the hard fact and the important fact that the work that we're doing round about our country and round about the world hasn't diminished since we started looking at our structures. And if we've got people who are swamped with what is being asked of them to do, and having to make some hard decisions about what to prioritize and what to let go, we need to be sure that we are comfortable with that as a church and support them as best we can, given the fact that this is an invitation and not an instruction, given the fact that we've already heard from the convener of the body who will be responsible for this, along with the Assembly trustees. I hope the Assembly has the courage and the compassion and the conviction to work with what Peter Johnson is suggesting here, so that when we meet again next year, we will have a much clearer idea of what it is we see as our priorities, and not in any way diminishing our prophetic voice to a church, to a country, and to a world who need to hear some, if not all, of the things that we have to say to them now. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you. Now, I have no other indications of people wishing to speak. Peter, do you wish to reply?
Thank you, Moderator. Johnston 361. Moderator, this is offered in a spirit of hopefulness to the General Assembly, that we engage in the work that is outward looking. That's how it is offered to you, and I hope you accept it in that way, and would encourage you to support it. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you. Convener.
Thank you, Moderator, and for the discussion. You have already heard me on the matter that I have every sympathy with the spirit of this section of deliverance. This is not so much about a capacity issue and not being able to do the work. It's about where it actually sits and how our voice is heard. And we understand that, and we know that, and we will work towards having that voice heard. That voice comes with confidence in the group that have been tasked with this in public life and social justice, with the work that the Principal Clerk does, with her engagement with government and interfaith communities and so forth. It's finding how all of this fits together without adding the burden of finding extra people or extra finance to pay for these an additional standing committee. So the fact that it says invite and has given a direction to us, we're happy to take that invitation on. The work is currently happening. It's working now. So I leave it to the General Assembly to decide whether you want to accept this section of deliverance, but the work is actually ongoing at the moment. So thank you, Moderator.
To the Assembly, though. Right, we've heard from the convener, but we then have to put it to the Assembly. Is the Assembly happy to accept the new section in the name of Peter Johnson? No, that's fine. Then we will call for a vote, please.
Sheila Kirk 532. Moderator has called for an electronic vote. We are voting either in favour or against Mr Johnson's new section. On the hub, the voting buttons will appear on your screen on the current live debate page. Green button for, red button against. A tick will appear to show that you have voted when you use these buttons. In the hall, on the Bluetooth devices, you will be pressing button 1 if you're voting for, and pressing button 2 if you are voting against the new proposed section. The vote is now open. Ten seconds to go. The vote is now closed.
There voted for 181 and against 167. Therefore, the new section is agreed. Can we move to section 12 as in the print? We have got some questions have come up on the screen. I'm going to call for Alan Hamilton, followed by Stuart Goldie in the first instance. Is your microphone now?
Oh, thank you. 144 Alan Hamilton. My question is this. I am assured that Sanctuary First has a growing digital ministry to Scots living abroad. If this is so, might the Salvation or the regulations governing the use of Salvation money be revisited in the future to allow Salvation funding to be allocated to Sanctuary First for this purpose?
Thank you, Alan, for your question. This is a question that has come to the Assembly Trustees and the Salvation Trustees in the past, and indeed our finance team, who have looked at this matter in detail, and particularly last year, and have assessed that the international engagement is limited to the extent that we cannot apply Salvation funding to Sanctuary First. And if we would need to know more about the detail of the numbers, in fact, and how significant they think they are in comparison to what we already know. So the answer would be no, we can't do that at the present time.
Okay, thank you. And Stuart Goldie.
Moderator, in your principle of getting names correct, it's Stuart Gowdy.
Oh, my apologies.
Thank you very much.
I am anxious to get names right, as you would have heard this
Stuart
morning.
Gowdy, 408. My question relates to whether it's possible for congregations in the Channel Islands to access the Salvation Trust funding. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I'm being assured by our new Head of Finance and General Treasurer that we'd need to check that under the terms and conditions of the fund. And so if you're willing to wait, we'll come back to you personally about that, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
No one else online? Ian, you should know about registering the hub.
I do. Alexander, number 1. Much to Dr. Browning's irritation. As someone who's worked with the Salvation Trust for the last 20 or so years, the new trust deed said excluding the UK and the Channel Islands, so that's why they are not included in the possibilities for funding. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you, that's helpful. Anyone else going to sneak up and ask a question or a comment, or can we move to section 12? Agreed? Oh, sorry. And online, thank you. Section 13. And online. Section 14. Thank you. Section 15. We have a question in the name of Susan Brown.
Moderator Brown, 56, just my age.
The clerk disagrees with you.
My question relates to gender balance on the Assembly Trustees. I know nothing about those being proposed, and I'm sure they're incredibly splendid and foolish people to agree. But I do want to ask how the gender balance is working out, because when the Assembly Trustees were established, that was an important question that we wanted to keep in mind at all times. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, for your question. I can assure the Assembly that we have a good balance of young people and gender balance too. Of course, when we put our adverts out for Assembly Trustees, we can only interview those who apply and have, in particular, the gifts and skills necessary to do the job that we are requiring of them. But we do strive to try and get the gender balance appropriate and an age balance as well. So, yes, we strive very hard to do that, and I hope the Assembly would trust us in that matter. Thank you.
Okay. No other individuals wishing to speak, then I put section 15 to the Assembly. And online. That then concludes the Assembly Trustees' report. So, as the Assembly, happy to approve the deliverance as a whole. Right, thank you very much, Convener and Trustees.